Thank you very much indeed for your time. We'll come to the Middle East in just a moment, but many people will just be coming to terms with the news as they wake up around the world. What's your reaction?
I am saddened and deeply depressed, but thoroughly unsurprised. And ultimately, I think what's going to happen in the coming 4 years, both domestically and internationally, is going to be a very, very dark time. There'll be a politics of retribution, of grievance. None of this, of course, says anything about the Democratic Party's utter failure, both during Biden's term and Harris in the last months when she became the candidate, that in many ways this election was not lost solely because of Gaza, but Gaza was a factor. And indeed, in many states, including swing states, Muslim voters particularly and others were so disgusted, correctly, with the Biden-Harris administration's backing of Israel's mass slaughter in Gaza. They didn't all vote for Donald Trump, but often they did not vote for the Democrats. And that makes a lot of sense considering what Harris and Biden had been supporting. So I am concerned, frankly. I'm concerned for the US. I'm concerned for the world. I think it's a very, very worrying outcome. And Americans have voted and they made the choice. But I am very concerned as a non-American citizen what this means for America and the world.
Indeed, and what you mentioned about Arab American voters, Muslim voters, particularly in some of those swing states, they indicated that they were likely to vote for Jill Stein, the Green Party candidate, as a protest vote. They couldn't hold their nose and vote for either Trump or Kamala Harris, but Trump's going to be the next man. I mean, what do you think the repercussions of that will be for the Middle East?
I mean, it's worth saying just before I answer that there has been no attempt by the Democratic Party in the last months to give any kind of thought or idea or care or concern for those who are deeply concerned about what's happening in the Middle East. And I might add, the majority of Democratic voters, according to their own polling, found that the Biden-Harris administration's blind, fanatical support and arming of Israel was unpopular. What does it mean for Palestine? Unbelievably grim. Now, one could argue, could it get any worse than it's been in the last year? Yes, it could. I think it's very possible. And Israel, let's be clear, has been very keen on Trump winning. Netanyahu's made that clear for a long time, although Biden-Harris has given him everything he wanted, frankly, in the last 12 plus months. Trump is seen and the people around Trump as fanatically pro-Israel, even more so than the Democrats. What I fear is that there'll be, even if there is pressure from Trump on Netanyahu to end the war, so to speak, in Gaza, what does that practically mean? Even more ethnic cleansing, the possible acceptance of settlements across Gaza, which Netanyahu is already talking about, a massive escalation in the West Bank to formally annex the entire territory of 3 million Palestinians, the possibility of supporting a military strike on Iran, which of course Israel's already done, but in a far greater way. I mean, Trump in some ways talked in his acceptance speech of ending wars, but the fact is when it came to Israel during his last term and the people around him, he was fanatically, I wouldn't even call it pro-Israel, but pro-settlements and pro-genocide and apartheid. And that's so concerning that, and this is no defense of Harris or Biden, but Harris, potentially with Democrats, could have been maybe convinced to move slightly on this issue, maybe, had she won. I fear that with Trump, that will not happen, that there'll be an escalation of the relationship between Israel and the US. And after what we've seen in the last 12 months, the idea that there could be even more mass slaughter with more US weapons and, frankly, even a greater US and Israeli presence across the Middle East is really devastating. And there's no way to dress that up. It's a very, very dark day, I think, for the Middle East and for Palestinians especially.
Indeed, and you've covered a lot of ground there, but there is Donald Trump's foreign policy in general to wonder about. So many questions there. You mentioned Iran. Of course, Donald Trump, while he was president in his first term, pulled out of the nuclear deal that had been signed under Barack Obama, which led to Iran, we believe, furthering their uranium enrichment project. And he also, it was assumed, cozied up to the North Korean leader, Kim Jong-un, at one point. So how do you think Donald Trump is going to deal with the various challenges elsewhere in the world?
Well, it's worth saying that, of course, there are now North Korean troops fighting on the Russian side in the war in Ukraine, which is apparent in the last couple of weeks. And look, Trump has made it pretty clear when it comes to the war in Ukraine. I think almost certainly he will force the hand of mostly Ukraine, but I guess also Putin to end the war. Almost certainly that'll be a capitulation to Russian ambitions. Almost certainly some of the territory that Russia controls in Ukraine will be given over to Russia, or Ukraine doesn't have the military might to actually resist it anymore. There needs to be a negotiated settlement. It's inevitable. But I fear that lots of Ukraine will be essentially given over to Putin. That is not, to me, a good thing at all, although negotiations is essential. I think another set of conflicts, look, North Korea has been, look, I mean, North Korea is always a strange situation. It's run by a fanatical dictator which oppresses his people and has for decades. I mean, the other question, of course, is China. The ultimate question is China. And I speak as someone living in Australia at the moment, that on the one hand, the US under Trump was very, very anti-China, certainly in the last phase of his presidency, as Biden has as well. And that relationship needs to improve. Now, whether it will under Trump, it's unclear. And of course, what I think you're increasingly seeing is this populist nationalism, which says that China is taking our jobs. This is their language, not mine. China is taking our jobs. China is taking all our opportunities. We need to punish China and maintain our global economic dominance. I mean, the US remains the most dominant nation in the world, although it's up to its eyeballs in debt. Much of that debt is now in China. I think that relationship is going to be pretty rocky, and whether China decides to potentially try to peacefully or otherwise take control of Taiwan, what will the US do in that situation? And I mean, frankly, the idea of some kind of global war over that is a catastrophic hope. To even dare to imagine something like that is petrifying. But I'm concerned about every aspect of Trump's foreign policy, because the issue with him is not just him. It's the people he's surrounding himself with, who in some ways are utter fanatics. And that is worrying, deeply, deeply worrying.
It is, and it's his final term, and he's not going to make the same mistake of having people who disagree with the way he wants to go in this particular term of office. Listen, we have to leave it there. Anthony, we appreciate you joining us, as always, on TRT World. Thank you very much indeed.